Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. Fletcher Cummings stood at his office window on the 42nd floor, watching the Seattle skyline blur in the evening rain. At 52, he commanded respect in every room he entered. His security consulting firm, Titan Strategic, had built its reputation on one simple principle: never trust anyone completely, verify everything. It was a philosophy that had made him wealthy beyond measure, but one he'd foolishly abandoned in his personal life. 25 years of marriage to Phyllis had seemed like a testament to true love. She was 38 when they met at a charity gala, a stunning blonde with emerald eyes who claimed to work in art curation. Fletcher had been immediately captivated by her sophistication and apparent vulnerability, a combination that had proven to be his greatest weakness. Their daughter Lindsay, now 22 and fresh out of Stanford with a degree in psychology, was the pride of Fletcher's life. She possessed his analytical mind, but had inherited what he believed was her mother's compassionate heart. Recently, she'd been helping them prepare to sell their Bellevue mansion, a task that had become necessary after Phyllis expressed her desire to downsize and travel. Fletcher's phone buzzed with a text from Phyllis, working late at the gallery again. "Don't wait up. Love you." He stared at the message, his jaw tightening. The gallery she claimed to manage had no record of her employment, something he discovered 3 weeks ago during a routine background check for their insurance renewal. That discovery had triggered a deeper investigation, one that revealed financial discrepancies he'd been too trusting to notice before. His private investigator, Malcolm Best, had been tracking Phyllis for 2 weeks. The preliminary reports painted a picture of a woman with an entirely fabricated identity, but Fletcher wanted irrefutable proof before making his move. In his world, preparation was everything, and patience was a weapon. The elevator chimed, and Lindsay appeared in his office doorway, her dark hair damp from the rain. "Dad, I finished boxing up Mom's study today. Some of those art books are incredibly heavy. I found some interesting things, though." Fletcher's attention sharpened. "What kind of things?" "Just some old photographs and documents in her desk. Nothing major, but I thought you might want to look through them before we donate the desk." She paused, studying his face. "Are you okay? You've seemed different lately." Fletcher forced a smile. "Just work stress, sweetheart. Why don't you head home and get some rest? Tomorrow's going to be a long day." After Lindsay left, Fletcher made a call to Malcolm. "I need you to expedite the investigation. Something's about to surface, and I want to be prepared for every possibility." "Already working on it, boss. I've got some interesting developments about her friend Tomas Moran. Should have a full report by tomorrow morning." Fletcher ended the call and stared out at the city lights. 25 years of his life, given to a woman who'd been playing an elaborate con. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated him. In his line of work, Fletcher had learned that the most devastating defeats came not from brute force, but from patience, planning, and perfect timing. Tomorrow, he would begin the careful process of dismantling everything Phyllis thought she'd built. Chapter 2. Beneath the Surface. The next morning, Fletcher arrived at his Bellevue home to find Lindsay in Phyllis's study, carefully wrapping framed photographs in newspaper. The room had always been off-limits to him. Phyllis's creative sanctuary, where she claimed to write art reviews and manage her gallery connections. "I saved all the desk contents for you to go through," Lindsay said, gesturing to 3 banker's boxes. "Some of it looks like personal correspondence that goes back years." Fletcher examined the study with new eyes. The expensive art books, the carefully curated antique furniture, the locked filing cabinet, everything suddenly seemed like stage dressing. Phyllis had always insisted on handling her own affairs, claiming she was financially independent from family money. He'd respected that independence, viewing it as strength rather than deception. His phone rang. Malcolm's voice was tense with excitement. "Fletcher, you need to hear this. Your wife isn't who she says she is. Her real name is Phyllis Hartwell, and she's been married twice before. Both previous husbands died under suspicious circumstances, but nothing was ever proven. The first one, allegedly heart attack at 45. The second, car accident. Both left her substantial inheritances." Fletcher's blood ran cold. "What about Tomas Moran?" That's where it gets interesting. He's not just her lover. He's her half-brother. They've been running long-term cons together for over 15 years. The art gallery, her expertise, even her family background, all fabricated. They target wealthy, isolated men and either slowly drain their assets, or Malcolm's voice trailed off. Or what? Or they arrange accidents. Fletcher, I think you need to consider that you might be in physical danger. There are too many coincidences here. Fletcher absorbed this information with the cold calculation that had built his empire. Continue surveillance, but keep your distance. I want to know every move they make, every phone call, every meeting. And Malcolm? Start documenting everything. When I move against them, I want it to be devastating and final. After ending the call, Fletcher turned to find Lindsay watching him with concern. Dad, who was that? You look like you've seen a ghost. He forced himself to appear calm. Just a client situation. Nothing for you to worry about. He glanced at the boxes of documents. Why don't you take a break? I'll finish going through these. Lindsay nodded, but hesitated at the door. Dad, can I ask you something? Has Mom seemed different to you lately? More distant. The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Fletcher realized that Lindsay might have noticed things he'd been too blinded by trust to see. What makes you ask that? I don't know. Little things. She never seems to be where she says she is. And yesterday, when I was moving her jewelry box, I found keys to a safety deposit box I've never seen before. When I asked her about it, she got really defensive and said it was just for important documents. Fletcher's mind raced. A safety deposit box meant hidden assets, backup plans, escape routes. Which bank? First National, downtown. Box 247. Lindsay frowned. Should I not have told you that? You did the right thing, sweetheart. Your mother and I. We need to have some conversations about our financial planning. After Lindsay left, Fletcher opened the first box of documents. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions and gave him the ammunition he needed. Love letters from Tomas dating back 3 years. Detailed financial records of accounts Fletcher had never known existed. And most damning of all, an insurance policy on Fletcher's life worth $5 million. A policy he'd never signed. His hands trembled slightly as he read Tomas's latest letter. The old man is getting suspicious. Maybe it's time to move to the final phase. The brake lines are easy enough to cut, and with his driving habits, it'll look like an accident. Fletcher set the letter down carefully. They weren't just planning to rob him. They were planning to kill him. The woman he'd loved and trusted for 25 years had been methodically planning his murder. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Phyllis's contact. His finger hovered over the call button for a long moment before he set the phone aside. Not yet. When he struck back, it would be with surgical precision, and they would never see it coming. Fletcher Cummings had built his fortune by understanding one fundamental truth. In any war, the person who controls the information controls the outcome. Phyllis and Tomas had just handed him everything he needed to destroy them completely. The war was about to begin. Chapter 3. The Discovery. Fletcher spent the following week conducting his own surveillance while maintaining the facade of normalcy. He documented Phyllis's actual schedule, which bore no resemblance to what she told him. The art gallery she claimed to manage didn't exist. Instead, she spent her days at Tomas Moran's apartment in Queen and emerging only for carefully staged phone calls to maintain her deception. Malcolm's expanded investigation revealed the full scope of their operation. Tomas, using the alias Thomas Morrison, posed as an art dealer and investment advisor. Together, they've been systematically emptying Fletcher's secondary accounts. Money he'd assumed Phyllis was investing in her gallery ventures. Over 3 years, they'd stolen nearly $2 million. But Fletcher was patient. He wanted more than financial restitution. He wanted complete annihilation. On Saturday morning, Fletcher and Lindsay returned to the house to finish packing Phyllis's study. Phyllis had conveniently scheduled another gallery emergency, giving them the entire day to work undisturbed. I still can't believe Mom's finally agreeing to sell this place, Lindsay said, carrying another box to the hallway. She used to say she'd never leave this house. Fletcher understood now. Phyllis wasn't planning to move. She was planning to disappear after his convenient accident. The house sale was just another layer of preparation for her escape. As they worked, Fletcher noticed Lindsay becoming increasingly quiet. Finally, she stopped packing altogether and sat heavily in Phyllis's desk chair. "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it." Fletcher's pulse quickened. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Yesterday, when I was at coffee with my friend Katie, I saw Mom. She was with a man I'd never seen before. They were intimate, like really intimate. And when I got closer to get a better look, I heard him call her Philly and say something about when this is all over." Fletcher felt the familiar cold rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "Did you recognize the man?" "No, but he was older, maybe your age. Dark hair, expensive suit. They seem to know each other really well." Lindsay's voice broke slightly. "Dad, I think Mom might be cheating on you." The moment had arrived sooner than Fletcher had planned, but he was ready. "Why don't we finish up here first? Then we'll talk about what you saw." They worked in heavy silence for another hour. When they reached Phyllis's desk, Fletcher pulled out the bottom drawer completely, ostensibly to make it easier to clean. As he did, a manila envelope that had been taped to the back of the drawer fell to the floor. Lindsay picked it up. "What's this?" Fletcher examined the envelope. It was thick, sealed, and labeled in Phyllis's handwriting. "Emergency Protocol, TM. Let's see what your mother's been hiding," Fletcher said grimly. As Lindsay opened the envelope, several items spilled out. A driver's license with Phyllis's photo, but the name Patricia Hartwell, a passport with the same false identity, and most shocking of all, copies of death certificates for two men Fletcher had never heard of, Charles Morrison and David Hartwell. Lindsay's hands began to tremble as she examined the documents. "Dad, this driver's license, it's Mom, but the name is wrong. And these death certificates." She looked up at Fletcher with growing horror. "Who are these men?" Fletcher knew, but he let Lindsay process the implications herself. He watched as understanding dawned in her eyes. The same sharp intelligence he'd passed down to her working through the horrifying possibilities. "These names," she whispered. "The man I saw her with yesterday. He introduced himself as Tom Morrison to the barista." Fletcher nodded grimly. "Lindsay, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your mother is not who we thought she was, and I think we might be in danger." Before Lindsay could respond, they heard the front door open and Phyllis's voice calling out cheerfully. "Hello? I'm home early. How's the packing going?" Fletcher quickly gathered the documents while Lindsay sat frozen in the chair. "Follow my lead," he whispered urgently. "And whatever happens, act normal." Footsteps approached the study. Fletcher positioned himself so he could see the doorway while keeping the evidence hidden behind his back. When Phyllis appeared, her smile seemed different now, predatory rather than warm. "How are my two favorite people doing?" she asked, but her eyes were scanning the room, taking inventory of what they'd unpacked. "Just finishing up the desk," Fletcher replied evenly. Lindsay found some interesting family photographs. Phyllis's gaze sharpened. "Oh, which photographs?" Lindsay, recovering her composure with remarkable speed, held up an innocuous family photo. "Just some old vacation pictures. I thought you might want to keep them." "Of course, darling. Although," Phyllis moved closer to the desk, her eyes now cold and calculating. "I hope you haven't been going through my private papers. Some things are meant to stay private." The threat in her voice was unmistakable. Fletcher realized they were no longer looking at his wife and Lindsay's mother. They were facing a predator who'd been discovered. "We would never invade your privacy," Fletcher said carefully. "We're just helping with the packing, like you asked." Phyllis studied them both for a long moment, then smiled, but it never reached her eyes. "Good. Well, I think that's enough for today. Why don't we all go out for dinner? I have some exciting news about our future plans." Fletcher knew those plans involved his death, but he nodded agreeably. "That sounds wonderful. Just let us clean up here first." As soon as Phyllis left the room, Lindsay grabbed Fletcher's arm. "Dad, we need to call the police." "Not yet," Fletcher whispered. "We need to be smarter than that. This is bigger than we know, and if we move too quickly, she'll disappear forever." He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Malcolm. "Emergency. They know we know. Execute contingency plan immediately." The game had changed. Phyllis and Tomas had spent years planning Fletcher's destruction, but they'd made one fatal error. They'd underestimated the depth of his rage and the precision of his planning. Tonight, Fletcher would begin the systematic destruction of everything they'd built. And unlike their previous victims, Fletcher Cummings was a man who never forgot, never forgave, and never lost. Chapter 4. The Web Unravels. That evening at dinner, Fletcher watched Phyllis perform the role of loving wife with practiced perfection. She spoke animatedly about their future travels and downsizing for a simpler life. Every word was poison wrapped in honey, and Fletcher marveled at how thoroughly he'd been deceived. Lindsay, to her credit, matched Phyllis's performance flawlessly. But Fletcher could see the fear and disgust in his daughter's eyes whenever Phyllis wasn't looking. The discovery had shattered Lindsay's world as completely as it had his own. "I was thinking we could look at condos in Hawaii," Phyllis said, reaching across the table to squeeze Fletcher's hand. "Somewhere peaceful where we can enjoy our retirement." Fletcher smiled warmly while mentally calculating how far $2 million would go in a place with no extradition treaties. "That sounds perfect, darling. Though I should probably wait until this current project wraps up. You know how demanding my clients can be." Of course, Phyllis agreed, but Fletcher caught the flash of impatience in her eyes. Whatever timeline she and Tomas had established, his continued existence was clearly becoming inconvenient. After dinner, Fletcher insisted on walking Lindsay to her car. Once they were out of Phyllis's earshot, he spoke quickly and quietly. "I need you to stay at Katie's tonight. Don't go back to your apartment. Don't follow your normal routine. Can you do that for me?" Lindsay nodded, her face pale but determined. "Dad, what are we going to do?" "I'm going to end this," Fletcher said simply. "But I need to know you're safe first. Tomorrow morning, I want you to go to my office and ask for Malcolm Best. Tell him I sent you, and stay with him until you hear from me." "What about you?" Fletcher's smile was cold as winter steel. "I'm going to have a conversation with your mother, one that's been 25 years in the making." That night, Fletcher lay in bed next to Phyllis, listening to her breathing and wondering how many nights she'd spent planning his death while lying beside him. Around 2 a.m., she slipped out of bed, claiming she couldn't sleep and was going to read in her study. Fletcher waited 10 minutes, then followed silently. The study door was closed, but he could hear Phyllis's voice through the thin wood. She was on the phone, getting suspicious. "The girl found something today, I could tell." "No, I handled it, but we might need to move faster than planned. The brake lines would be better, more natural, tomorrow night when he drives to his client meeting." Fletcher had heard enough. He returned to bed and lay staring at the ceiling until dawn, his mind working through every detail of what would come next. The next morning, Phyllis was overly cheerful again, making Fletcher's favorite breakfast and chattering about their plans for the day. When she kissed him goodbye, Fletcher wondered if she was already imagining the insurance payout. At his office, Fletcher found Malcolm waiting with Lindsay and a comprehensive file that laid out the full scope of Phyllis and Tomas's operation. "It's even worse than we thought," Malcolm reported. "They've done this 6 times before. Always wealthy, isolated men. Always the same pattern. Long-term relationship, gradual financial drainage, then an accident. They've perfected it to an art form." Lindsay looked sick. "Those death certificates we found. 2 of their previous victims," Malcolm confirmed. Charles Morrison was a real estate developer in San Francisco. Heart attack at 45, no previous cardiac issues. David Hartwell was a tech entrepreneur in Portland. Single car accident on a road he'd driven hundreds of times. Fletcher studied crime scene photos and police reports. Why haven't they been caught? They're smart, they're patient, and they never leave loose ends. Each time, they change identities completely and move to a new city. They probably would have disappeared after your accident and started over somewhere else. "Would have," Fletcher repeated. "But they made a mistake." "What's that?" Fletcher's smile was terrifying in its coldness. "They chose me." He turned to Lindsay. "I need you to stay here with Malcolm today. Don't leave this building. Don't take any calls. Don't contact anyone. Can you do that?" Lindsay nodded, though her hands were shaking. "Dad, please be careful. If they're as dangerous as Malcolm says." "They are," Fletcher agreed. but they've never faced someone who knows exactly who they are and what they're capable of. That levels the playing field considerably. Fletcher spent the day making careful preparations. He contacted his attorney, his banker, and several other professionals whose services would be crucial in the coming hours. Then he made a series of phone calls to contacts in law enforcement, private security, and other industries where absolute discretion was valued above all else. By 6 p.m., everything was in place. Fletcher drove home with the knowledge that Phyllis and Tomas expected him to die that night. His car had indeed been tampered with. Malcolm's tech team had found the severed brake lines and carefully repaired them without leaving any evidence of the discovery. Phyllis greeted him at the door with champagne. I thought we should celebrate our decision to downsize. To new beginnings. Fletcher raised his glass, studying the woman who'd planned to murder him. To endings, he corrected quietly. What? To new endings, Fletcher clarified with a smile. Sometimes the old must die completely before the new can begin. Phyllis laughed, missing the threat entirely. You always were philosophical. After dinner, Fletcher announced he needed to meet with a client across town. Phyllis expressed concern about him driving at night, a performance so perfectly crafted that Fletcher almost admired her skill. I'll be fine, he assured her. The roads are clear tonight. He kissed her goodbye, wondering if she was already rehearsing her grief for the police. Fletcher drove his repaired car to his office, then switched to a different vehicle from his company's fleet. By 8 p.m., he was parked across the street from Tomas Moran's apartment building, waiting. He didn't have to wait long. At 8:30, Phyllis's car pulled into the parking garage. She was coming to celebrate her husband's murder with her accomplice and half-brother. Fletcher smiled in the darkness. The trap was set, and the prey was walking in willingly. Now the real game would begin. Chapter 5. The Perfect Storm. Fletcher watched from his surveillance position as Phyllis entered Tomas's building. Through his high-powered scope, he could see into the apartment's living room. Malcolm's team had installed listening devices throughout the space during Tomas's absence the previous day, so Fletcher could hear every word of their conversation through his earpiece. It should have happened by now, Phyllis was saying, pacing nervously across the room. The brake lines were completely severed. He couldn't have made it past the first hill. Tomas, a lean man with prematurely gray hair and cold eyes, poured 2 glasses of wine. Maybe he decided not to go to the meeting. These things require patience, Philly. We've never failed before. But what if he found something? The girl was acting strange yesterday, and Fletcher's been different lately. More watchful. Fletcher adjusted his position, studying the man who'd been planning his death. Tomas Moran was exactly what he'd expected, a predator who'd learned to disguise himself as civilized. But Fletcher had dealt with worse monsters in his line of work. You're paranoid, Tomas said dismissively. The old man trusts you completely. He has for 25 years. One more night won't matter. Easy for you to say, Phyllis snapped. You don't have to sleep next to him, knowing what's coming. Do you know how many times I've fantasized about just smothering him with a pillow? Fletcher's jaw tightened. Through his earpiece, he heard Tomas laugh. That's why we stick to the plan. Accidents are cleaner, and they pay better. $5 million in life insurance, plus whatever we can liquidate from his accounts before the estate gets frozen. We'll be set for life. What about the daughter? Fletcher's blood went cold. What about her? Tomas asked. She's too smart, and she was there when we found those documents. If she starts asking questions, then we handle her like we handled the Portland situation, Tomas said coldly. A grieving daughter commits suicide after losing her father. Tragic but believable. Fletcher closed his eyes, feeling the familiar rage building to dangerous levels. They weren't just planning to kill him. They were planning to murder Lindsay too. I should get back, Phyllis said. If he comes home, and I'm not there, he's not coming home, Philly. Trust me. Fletcher listened as they finalized their plans for the next phase of the operation. Tomas would call in the accident as a concerned friend. Phyllis would play the devastated widow. They'd wait a few weeks, then quietly liquidate everything and disappear. After Phyllis left, Fletcher made his move. He'd studied the building's security system and knew exactly how to disable the cameras without triggering alerts. The lock on Tomas's apartment was expensive, but not impregnable. Fletcher had it open in under 30 seconds. Tomas was washing wine glasses in the kitchen when Fletcher appeared behind him like a ghost. "Hello, Thomas. Or do you prefer Tomas?" Tomas spun around, dropping a glass that shattered on the floor. His face went white as he recognized Fletcher. "Surprised to see me?" Fletcher asked conversationally. "I would have been here sooner, but I had to get my brakes fixed. Funny thing about brake lines, they don't usually cut themselves." Tomas lunged for a knife block, but Fletcher was faster. Years of military training and combat experience trumped Tomas's desperation. Within seconds, Tomas was on the floor with Fletcher's knee pressed against his throat. "Let me explain how this is going to work," Fletcher said quietly. "I know everything. Your real names, your previous victims, your offshore accounts, your escape plans. I know about the insurance policy you forged and the safety deposit box at First National. I know you've killed at least 6 men and planned to kill my daughter after you murdered me." Tomas struggled weakly. "You can't prove anything." Fletcher smiled. "I don't need to prove anything. I'm not a cop." He applied pressure until Tomas's eyes rolled back, then eased off slightly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Phyllis and tell her there's been a complication. Tell her to come back here immediately. Then you're going to sit quietly while I explain the new rules of engagement. And if I refuse?" Fletcher's smile disappeared entirely. "Then I'll demonstrate exactly why my company's military contracts are so lucrative. And trust me, Thomas, you don't want that demonstration." 30 minutes later, Phyllis returned to find Fletcher sitting calmly in Tomas's living room, while Tomas himself was secured to a chair with military-grade restraints. "Fletcher," she gasped, her mask finally slipping completely. "What are you doing here?" "Having a family reunion," Fletcher replied. "Please sit down. We have a lot to discuss." Phyllis remained standing, her eyes darting between Fletcher and the apartment's exits. "I don't understand what's happening here." "Of course you do. You're Phyllis Hartwell. Thomas here is your half-brother Tomas Moran, and together you've murdered at least 6 men for their money. Tonight, you plan to add me and my daughter to that list." The last trace of Phyllis's deception evaporated. Her face hardened into something cold and calculating. "Prove it." Fletcher pulled out his phone and played a recording of their earlier conversation. As Phyllis listened to her own voice discussing his murder and Lindsay's planned suicide, all color drained from her face. 25 years, Fletcher said softly. 25 years of my life you stole with lies. You ate at my table, slept in my bed, watched me raise a daughter I thought was ours together, all while planning to kill us both. Fletcher, please. No. Fletcher's voice cut through her plea like a blade. The time for explanations is over. Now we discuss consequences. He stood up, and both Phyllis and Tomas seemed to shrink back from the cold fury radiating from him. "You made 2 crucial mistakes," Fletcher continued. "First, you underestimated my capacity for patience. And second, you threatened my daughter." Fletcher pulled out a tablet and showed them both a series of photographs and documents. "These are copies of everything. Your real identities, evidence of your previous murders, financial records of your theft, recordings of your conversations. One set has been delivered to the FBI. Another set goes to Interpol. A third set goes to a very enterprising journalist who specializes in cold cases." Phyllis and Tomas stared at the evidence of their downfall. "But that's just the legal dimension," Fletcher continued. "I've also contacted some old friends from my military days. People who specialize in finding individuals who don't want to be found. People who understand that some debts can only be paid in blood. What do you want?" Tomas whispered. Fletcher's smile was terrifying. "I want you to understand that your lives as you knew them are over. Completely, permanently, irreversibly over. Everything you've built, everyone you thought you could trust, every safe haven you thought you had gone." He leaned closer to Phyllis. "But before we discuss your future, I want you to know exactly how thoroughly you've lost." Fletcher pulled out another phone and dialed. "Malcolm? Send him in." Within minutes, Fletcher's study door opened and Lindsay entered, flanked by FBI agents and several of Fletcher's security team. "Hello, Mother," Lindsay said coldly. "Or should I call you Phyllis Hartwell?" Phyllis stared at her daughter in shock. Lindsay, sweetie, this is all a misunderstanding. No more lies, Lindsay interrupted. I heard the recordings. I know you planned to kill me too. The devastation in Phyllis's eyes was complete. She'd lost everything. Her cover, her targets, her freedom, and most importantly, the daughter she'd never expected to care about. Fletcher watched with cold satisfaction as the FBI agents read them their rights. But this was only the beginning. Legal justice was too clean, too merciful for what they'd done. Fletcher Cummings was just getting started. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. The FBI arrested Phyllis and Tomas that night, but Fletcher knew the legal system would be only the first layer of their punishment. While they sat in federal holding cells, he put the second phase of his plan into motion. Over the next week, Fletcher methodically dismantled every aspect of their criminal network. Using his connections in private security, international banking, and law enforcement, he tracked down their offshore accounts, their hidden assets, and their escape routes. But more importantly, he identified their other victims. There were 12 men over 15 years, Malcolm reported during a meeting in Fletcher's office. 6 confirmed dead, 6 others who survived but lost everything. The survivors are scattered across the country, most of them financially ruined and psychologically destroyed. Fletcher studied the files. Each victim had followed the same pattern: successful, isolated men who'd been systematically drained of their wealth and, in many cases, their lives. Contact them all. Tell them we're organizing something special. What kind of special? Fletcher's smile was cold. A support group. While the FBI built their case, Fletcher flew across the country meeting with Phyllis and Tomas's survivors. What he found was a collection of broken men whose lives had been shattered by the same predators who'd targeted him. Dr. Peter Richmond, a surgeon from Denver, had lost his medical practice and his reputation when Phyllis's false accusations of abuse surfaced during their divorce proceedings. Wallace Neal, a tech entrepreneur from Austin, had suffered a nervous breakdown when his version of Phyllis disappeared with his company's development funds. Each man had a similar story of trust betrayed and lives destroyed. They're going to prison, Fletcher told the group when they gathered in his Seattle conference room. But that's not enough. Prison is too comfortable for what they've done to us. What are you suggesting? Asked Chuck Reese, a former investment banker whose wife's suicide had actually been murder. Fletcher smiled. I'm suggesting we give them a taste of their own medicine. They've spent 15 years making us suffer. I think it's time they understood what that feels like. Over the next month, Fletcher orchestrated a campaign of psychological warfare that would have impressed military strategists. Using his network of contacts, he ensured that Phyllis and Tomas's every moment in prison was a calculated misery. Their cell assignments were arranged to put them in contact with inmates who'd lost family members to domestic violence. Inmates who didn't appreciate con artists who targeted loving husbands. Their commissary accounts were mysteriously frozen and unfrozen at random intervals. Their legal mail was delayed, their phone privileges revoked for minor infractions, and their visitor requests denied on technicalities. But Fletcher's masterstroke was more subtle. He hired a team of psychologists and social engineers to conduct a long-term study on criminal rehabilitation. Phyllis and Tomas were selected as subjects, meaning they were subjected to daily interviews, evaluations, and experiments designed to break down their psychological defenses. How does it feel? Dr. Allison McCormick asked Phyllis during one session. To know that your daughter has publicly disowned you and changed her name? Phyllis had indeed lost Lindsay forever. After learning the truth about her mother's identity and crimes, Lindsay had legally changed her surname to her middle name, Warren, and cut off all contact. The loss of her daughter was devastating Phyllis in ways that prison never could. Meanwhile, Fletcher made sure their crimes received maximum publicity. He hired a documentary filmmaker to create an expose that aired on major networks. He funded a true crime podcast that detailed their methods and victims. He ensured that their names became synonymous with betrayal and murder. The goal, Fletcher explained to his fellow survivors, is to make sure they never have a moment's peace, never feel safe, never stop looking over their shoulders. Even if they eventually get released, their lives will be a constant reminder of what they've done. Tomas broke first. After 6 months of Fletcher's psychological campaign, he attempted suicide in his cell. He survived, but the attempt earned him a transfer to a psychiatric facility where the conditions were even worse than prison. Phyllis held out longer, but Fletcher was patient. He'd learned patience from her betrayal, and now he wielded it like a weapon. Every day brought new psychological pressure, new reminders of what she'd lost, new evidence that her old life was permanently over. The legal proceedings dragged on for 18 months, during which Fletcher's campaign never let up. By the time Phyllis and Tomas were finally sentenced, life in prison without parole for multiple counts of murder, they were broken shells of their former selves. But Fletcher wasn't done. "Prison is just the beginning," he told Malcolm as they watched the sentencing on television. "They took 25 years of my life. I'm going to make sure their remaining years are a constant reminder of that debt." Fletcher's final move was perhaps his most ruthless. Using his connections in the prison system, he arranged for Phyllis and Tomas to be housed in different facilities on opposite sides of the country. But he made sure they could communicate with each other, just enough to maintain hope of reunion, but never enough to plan or find comfort. Then he began sending them updates on Lindsay's life. Every month, Phyllis received a package of photographs and news clippings showing Lindsay's success and happiness. Lindsay had returned to school for her PhD, gotten engaged to a wonderful man, and was building a life that explicitly excluded any memory of the woman who'd claimed to be her mother. The photographs showed Lindsay at her engagement party, at her graduation, at her wedding, all events Phyllis would never be part of. Each package included a note. "Your daughter is happy. She doesn't need you. She never thinks about you." Tomas received similar packages, but is focused on the other victims who were rebuilding their lives. Peter Richmond had reopened his medical practice. Wallace Neal had started a new company. Chuck Reese had remarried and found peace. Each success was a reminder that their victims had survived while their predators rotted in cages. "Isn't this enough?" Malcolm asked after the 3rd year of Fletcher's campaign. "They're already destroyed." Fletcher considered the question seriously. "They took everything from me, my trust, my love, my sense of safety, 25 years of my life. They plan to take my daughter's life, too. They destroyed at least 12 other men, killed 6 people, and felt no remorse." He paused, staring out his office window at the Seattle skyline. "No," he said finally, "it's not enough. It will never be enough. They chose to be monsters, and monsters don't deserve mercy." Fletcher Cummings had learned the hard way that some betrayals cut so deep they change a person's fundamental nature. Phyllis and Tomas had turned him into something colder, more calculating, and infinitely more dangerous than the trusting man he'd once been. They would spend the rest of their lives paying for that transformation. Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. 3 years after the sentencing, Fletcher received an unexpected visitor. Sean Gross, a federal prosecutor who'd worked the case, requested a private meeting that couldn't be conducted at Fletcher's office or home. They met at a secluded restaurant outside Seattle, where Gross delivered news that changed everything Fletcher thought he knew about his story. "There's something you need to know about Phyllis," Gross said quietly. "Something that came out during a separate investigation." Fletcher leaned forward. "What kind of something?" "Lindsay isn't her biological daughter." The words hit Fletcher like a physical blow. "What?" "We ran DNA tests as part of a different case. Phyllis kidnapped Lindsay when she was 3 years old from a family in California. The Warrens, her real parents, have been searching for her for almost 20 years. Fletcher felt the world shift beneath him. "That's impossible. I was there when Lindsay was born. I have pictures, hospital records, all fabricated. Very sophisticated fabrications, but fake nonetheless. The hospital records show a baby girl was born that day, but she died within hours of birth. Somehow, Phyllis obtained the identity and substituted Lindsay." Fletcher's mind raced through implications. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the Warren family wants to meet her. And because there's more." Gross pulled out a thick file. "Phyllis's real daughter, her biological child with her first husband, is still alive. Her name is Carmen Warren, and she's been searching for her mother for 15 years. Fletcher stared at the photographs of a young woman who looked startlingly like Phyllis. Where is she? Portland. She's a social worker who specializes in missing children cases. She became obsessed with finding her mother after Phyllis disappeared when she was 7 years old. The revelation recontextualized everything Fletcher thought he understood about his situation. Phyllis hadn't just been a con artist. She'd been a child abductor who'd built her life on stealing other people's children. There's one more thing, Gross continued. Carmen Warren has been working with us to build additional cases against her mother. She wants to testify about Phyllis's real character. Fletcher absorbed this information with growing fury. Not only had Phyllis stolen 25 years of his life and planned his murder, but she'd built their entire relationship on the foundation of kidnapping a child. I need to see Lindsay, Fletcher said. Actually, she's already been informed. She's waiting outside. Lindsay entered the restaurant looking shaken but determined. Fletcher studied her face, searching for signs of the traumatic loss she'd experienced but couldn't remember. I know, she said simply. About everything. About who I really am, about my biological parents, about Carmen. Fletcher reached across the table and took her hand. How are you handling this? I'm angry, Lindsay said quietly. Angrier than I've ever been in my life. That woman didn't just steal your life and try to kill us. She stole my entire childhood, my real family, my identity. What do you want to do? Lindsay's expression hardened in a way that reminded Fletcher of himself. I want to make sure she knows. I want her to understand that every single thing she built was a lie, and that her real daughter hates her for what she's done. Fletcher smiled grimly. His daughter, regardless of biology, was definitely his child in the ways that mattered. I think, Fletcher said slowly, it's time for a family reunion. 2 weeks later, Fletcher arranged for a special visit to Phyllis's prison. Using his connections and a carefully crafted legal pretext, he secured permission for an impact statement session that would allow multiple victims to confront Phyllis simultaneously. Phyllis was brought to the visitor's room expecting to see her lawyer. Instead, she found Fletcher, Lindsay, Carmen Warren, and 2 representatives from the Warren family, Lindsay's biological parents. The shock on Phyllis's face was complete. For the first time in 3 years of psychological warfare, Fletcher saw genuine surprise in her eyes. Hello, Phyllis, Fletcher said calmly. I brought some people you should meet. Phyllis stared at Carmen with undisguised horror. Carmen? What are you doing here? Looking for my mother, Carmen replied coldly. The same mother who abandoned me when I was 7 years old to go play house with stolen children and murder innocent men. Phyllis's gaze shifted to the Warrens, and understanding dawned. No, that's not possible. Hello, Sarah, said June Warren, Lindsay's biological mother. That's her real name, she explained to Fletcher. Sarah Elizabeth Warren. We've been looking for her for 19 years. Lindsay, Sarah, stared at her biological parents with a mixture of recognition and grief. I remember you, she whispered. I remember a yellow bedroom and a dog named Max. June Warren began crying. You love that dog so much. We never stopped hoping we'd find you. Fletcher watched Phyllis process the complete destruction of her legacy. Not only had her criminal career ended in permanent imprisonment, but her stolen daughter had been returned to her real family, and her biological daughter despised her. This isn't possible, Phyllis repeated, but her voice lacked conviction. It's not only possible, Fletcher said, it's permanent. Sarah is going to rebuild her relationship with her real family. Carmen is going to testify against you in federal court. And you're going to spend the rest of your life knowing that everything you touched turned to ashes. Phyllis looked desperately at Lindsay. Sarah, please, sweetheart. I raised you. I loved you. You kidnapped me, Sarah replied with ice-cold precision. You stole me from people who actually loved me, and you used me as a prop in your murder schemes. Everything about my childhood was a lie. That's not true. It is true, Carmen interrupted. Just like everything else about you is a lie. You were never a mother to me, and you were never a mother to her. You're a thief and a murderer, and you deserve everything that's happened to you. Fletcher watched Phyllis crumble. In that moment, he realized his revenge was complete. She'd lost everything. Her freedom, her identity, her schemes, and now, most crushingly both daughters. "There's one more thing," Fletcher said as the visit ended. "Tomas received a similar visit last week. His victims' families wanted to meet him too. From what I hear, he took it about as well as you are." As they prepared to leave, Fletcher leaned close to Phyllis. 25 years, he whispered. "You owe me 25 years, and I collect my debts with interest. Every day, for the rest of your life, you'll remember this moment. Every day, you'll know that you lost completely." Phyllis stared at him with empty eyes. "I loved you." Fletcher's smile was colder than Arctic wind. "No, you didn't. You don't know what love means. But you're going to have plenty of time to learn the difference." As they walked away, Sarah took Fletcher's arm. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being my real father. Biology doesn't matter. You raised me, you protected me, you loved me. That makes you my dad, regardless of DNA." Fletcher felt something warm break through the ice that had surrounded his heart for 3 years. Not forgiveness. He would never forgive Phyllis and Tomas for what they'd done. But acceptance, perhaps, and the knowledge that some things survived even the deepest betrayals. "Come on," he said to both his daughters, one biological, one chosen. "Let's go home." Behind them, Phyllis was led back to her cell, where she would spend the rest of her life remembering the moment she lost everything that had ever mattered. Fletcher's revenge was complete, but more importantly, his family was finally free. Chapter 8. The Inheritance of Vengeance. 6 months after the family reunion, Fletcher discovered that his story with Phyllis and Tomas was far from over. Malcolm delivered the news during their regular security briefing, his expression unusually grim. "We have a problem," Malcolm announced, sliding a thick file across Fletcher's desk. "Phyllis and Tomas weren't working alone. There's a third partner we never identified." Fletcher opened the file to find surveillance photos of a woman in her 50s with sharp features and calculating eyes. "Who is she?" "Vera Daly, Phyllis's older sister and the actual mastermind behind their operation. She's been running logistics from outside the country for the past 15 years, managing their finances and escape routes." Fletcher studied the photographs with growing concern. "Why are we just learning about her now?" "Because she's good. Very good. She stayed completely off our radar during the investigation, and she's been smart enough to avoid any direct contact with Phyllis or Tomas since their arrest." Malcolm paused. "But she's been watching us." "What do you mean?" Malcolm pulled out a second set of photographs. "These were taken outside your office, Sarah's university, Carmen's workplace, and the Warren family home. She's been conducting surveillance on all of you for the past 3 months." Fletcher felt the familiar cold rage building. What does she want? Best guess? Revenge. Her siblings are in prison for life. Their operation is destroyed, and their assets have been seized. She's lost everything because of you. Fletcher leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. He'd spent 3 years systematically destroying Phyllis and Tomas, but he'd left a loose end that was now threatening his family. "There's more," Malcolm continued. "Vera Daly isn't just Phyllis's sister. She's a legitimate threat. Military background, special forces training, expertise in surveillance and elimination. If she's planning something against your family..." "She won't get the chance," Fletcher interrupted. "I want her location, her resources, her plans. I want to know everything about her by tomorrow morning. Already working on it." "But Fletcher, this woman is different from Phyllis and Tomas. She's not a con artist or a manipulator. She's a soldier. If you're planning to go after her the same way..." "I'm not," Fletcher said quietly. "This time, I'm going to end it permanently." That evening, Fletcher called an emergency family meeting. Sarah, Carmen, and the Warrens gathered at his Bellevue home, where Fletcher explained the new threat. "So we're still not safe?" asked June Warren, her face pale with worry. "Not yet," Fletcher admitted. "But we will be. I'm going to make sure of it." Carmen studied the surveillance photos with professional interest. "These are good quality, taken with expensive equipment. She's been planning this for months." "What would you do?" Fletcher asked her. "If I were her, I'd target the thing that hurt my family the most. In this case, that's you and everyone you care about." Carmen's expression hardened. "She's not planning simple revenge. She's planning to destroy your entire support system." Fletcher nodded grimly. That's what I thought too. Over the next week, Fletcher's security team uncovered the full scope of Vera Daly's operation. She'd been methodically gathering intelligence on Fletcher's family, his business associates, and his methods. More disturbingly, she'd been recruiting assets, former military personnel with questionable ethics who were willing to work for substantial compensation. She's building a team, Malcolm reported. 6 men so far, all with special forces backgrounds and flexible moral codes. They've been conducting practice runs on commercial buildings similar to your office complex. Fletcher studied the tactical analysis. She's planning to hit us directly. It looks that way. But here's the interesting part. She's also been in contact with some of your old enemies. People your company has put out of business over the years. Fletcher's expression darkened. She's building a coalition. Gets worse. She's been feeding information to Phyllis and Tomas in prison, keeping them updated on her plans. Apparently, they're all very excited about what's coming. Fletcher stood up and walked to his office window, staring out at the Seattle skyline. For 3 years, he believed his revenge was complete. Now he realized he'd been fighting only 2/3 of the enemy. Malcolm, he said quietly, how many people have we helped over the years? Victims of fraud, corporate espionage, extortion. Hundreds, maybe thousands when you count the secondary effects. And how many of them would be interested in settling some old scores? Malcolm's smile was sharp. All of them. Fletcher turned back to face his security chief. Then it's time to collect some favors. If Vera Daly wants a war, she's going to get one. But it won't be the war she's expecting. Fletcher spent the next month building his own coalition. Using his network of contacts in law enforcement, private security, and corporate intelligence, he assembled a group of professionals who had their own reasons for wanting to see Phyllis's operation completely destroyed. Dr. Peter Richmond brought his connections in the medical community, professionals who've been targeted by medical fraud schemes. Wallace Neal provided tech expertise and cyber warfare capabilities. Chuck Reese offered financial intelligence and banking connections. But Fletcher's most valuable ally turned out to be Carmen Warren. I've been working missing children cases for 15 years, she explained during a strategy meeting. I know how these networks operate, and I know their weaknesses. Vera isn't just planning to hurt your family. She's planning to restart the entire operation with new targets. What do you mean? Carmen pulled out her own files. I've been tracking similar cases across the country. Wealthy men whose wives died or disappeared under suspicious circumstances, children who vanished without a trace, financial crimes that followed the same patterns as Phyllis and Tomas's work. Fletcher studied the evidence. You think there are more of them? I think Phyllis and Tomas were just one cell in a larger network. And I think Vera Daly has been running that network from the shadows for decades. The revelation changed everything. Fletcher realized he wasn't just fighting for his family's safety. He was fighting to stop a criminal organization that had been destroying lives for generations. How many victims? He asked. Potentially hundreds, maybe thousands over the years. The operation is bigger than we ever imagined. Fletcher felt the familiar cold rage building, but this time it was focused on something larger than personal revenge. Then we're not just going to stop Vera Daly. We're going to burn down the entire network. Carmen smiled, and for the first time, Fletcher saw the resemblance to Phyllis. But where Phyllis's smile had been deceptive, Carmen's was righteously furious. Now you're thinking like someone who wants to win, she said. Fletcher began planning the most comprehensive operation of his career. Not just revenge against Vera Daly, but the complete annihilation of everything Phyllis and her family had built. The war was about to begin, and this time, Fletcher intended to leave no survivors. Chapter 9. The Final War. Fletcher's war against Vera Daly and her network began with misdirection. Instead of hiding from her surveillance, he deliberately made himself visible, creating the appearance of a vulnerable target while his real preparations proceeded in shadow. For 2 weeks, Fletcher maintained his normal routine. Office meetings, family dinners, predictable travel patterns. Meanwhile, his expanded team worked around the clock to map Vera's entire operation. Carmen's investigation had revealed the scope of their enemy. The network included 12 active cells across North America, each running variations of Phyllis and Tomas's long-term con schemes. Over 30 years, they'd stolen an estimated $50 million and killed at least 24 people. It's a family business, Carmen explained during a briefing. 3 generations of criminals, all working variations of the same basic con. Vera has been the strategic mastermind since the 1990s. Fletcher studied organizational charts that mapped 3 decades of systematic murder. How did law enforcement miss this? Because they were smart, Malcolm replied. They never operated in the same jurisdiction twice. They changed identities frequently, and they always left enough time between operations to avoid pattern recognition. Until now, Fletcher said grimly. The plan Fletcher developed was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of trying to capture or eliminate Vera Daly, he would trick her into destroying her own network. Phase 1 began with carefully leaked intelligence. Through contacts and law enforcement, Fletcher ensured that evidence of the network's crimes reached federal investigators in multiple jurisdictions simultaneously. Within days, FBI task forces were forming in 6 different cities. But Fletcher didn't wait for the legal system to act. Phase 2 involved Sarah and the psychological warfare tactics she'd learned from watching Fletcher's 3-year campaign against her kidnappers. I'm going to visit Phyllis again, Sarah announced during a family strategy meeting. But this time, I'm going to give her something she wants. What? Fletcher asked. Hope, Sarah replied with a cold smile that reminded everyone exactly whose daughter she really was. Sarah's visit to Phyllis was carefully choreographed theater. She told Phyllis that she'd been having doubts about Fletcher, that she was beginning to remember the good times from her childhood, and that she might be willing to rebuild their relationship. But only if you help me understand the truth, Sarah said during the recorded conversation. I need to know everything about your family, your real plans, how the network operated. I need to understand who you really are. Phyllis, desperate for any connection with her stolen daughter, provided a complete confession. She detailed the network structure, identified key players, and revealed operational secrets that had been hidden for decades. But most importantly, she told Sarah exactly how to contact Vera Daly. Phase 3 was Fletcher's masterstroke. Using Phyllis's information, Sarah made contact with Vera under the pretense of being a potential recruit. She presented herself as a young woman who'd been corrupted by learning the truth about her mother's crimes and wanted to join the family business. I have access to Fletcher's security systems, Sarah told Vera during their first phone conversation. I know his routines, his weaknesses, his plans. I can give you everything you need to destroy him. Vera, hungry for revenge and convinced that Sarah was genuinely turned against Fletcher, began sharing operational details. She revealed the location of her base of operations, the identity of her recruited mercenaries, and most crucially, the timing of her planned attack. Fletcher listened to the recorded conversations with cold satisfaction. Vera Daly, like her sister before her, had fallen for the same fundamental mistake. She'd underestimated the people she was trying to destroy. Phase 4 began on a cold Seattle morning when Vera's mercenary team moved into position around Fletcher's office building. They were expecting to find their target following his normal routine, vulnerable and unaware. Instead, they walked into the most sophisticated ambush Fletcher had ever orchestrated. Every member of Vera's team was taken down simultaneously by Fletcher's expanded security force. The building had been evacuated hours earlier. The surveillance cameras had been recording everything, and federal agents were waiting in position to make arrests. But Vera Daly herself wasn't among the captured mercenaries. She's smarter than that, Carmen observed as they watched the arrest from Fletcher's safe house. She would never put herself in direct danger. Fletcher smiled grimly. I'm counting on it. Phase 5 was personal. While federal agents processed her captured team, Vera Daly received a phone call from her sister's stolen daughter. It's done, Sarah told her. Fletcher's dead, along with his security team. But there's a problem. What kind of problem? The FBI was already investigating. They had surveillance teams in place. I think someone leaked information about the network. Vera's voice turned cold. Who? I think it was Phyllis. She's been talking to federal investigators, trading information for better prison conditions. She gave them everything. Names, locations, operational details. The lie was perfectly crafted. Vera Daly, convinced that her sister had betrayed the entire network to save herself, made the exact decision Fletcher had been counting on. She decided to eliminate Phyllis personally. 2 days later, Vera Daly attempted to infiltrate the federal prison where Phyllis was being held. Her plan was simple: kill her sister before she could provide any more information to investigators. But Fletcher's team was waiting. The final confrontation took place in the prison parking lot, where Vera found herself surrounded by federal agents, local police, and Fletcher himself. "Hello, Vera," Fletcher said calmly. "Your sister sends her regards." Vera Daly stared at Fletcher with undisguised hatred. "You're supposed to be dead. So were a lot of people your family killed over the years. The difference is I fight back." As federal agents arrested Vera Daly, Fletcher felt the satisfying completion of a plan 3 years in the making. The network that had destroyed so many lives was finally broken. But he wasn't finished. Over the following months, Fletcher used his evidence and connections to ensure that every member of the criminal network faced justice. Federal investigations in 12 cities resulted in 47 arrests. Millions of dollars in stolen assets were recovered and returned to victims' families. The legal proceedings took 2 years, but Fletcher was patient. He attended every trial, watched every sentencing, and made sure every victim's family knew that justice had finally been served. Phyllis died in prison during the 2nd year of trials, officially of natural causes, though Fletcher suspected the psychological pressure of learning that her entire network had been destroyed might have contributed to her heart failure. Tomas lasted another 6 months before following his sister into death. His suicide note contained only 2 words: "Fletcher wins." Vera Daly received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Her last words to Fletcher, spoken during the final sentencing hearing, were a promise of revenge from beyond the grave. Fletcher's response was simple: "There won't be anyone left to carry it out." Epilogue: The Price of Betrayal. 5 years after Vera Daly's arrest, Fletcher Cummings stood in the garden of his new home in Montana, watching Sarah play with her 3-year-old daughter. Sarah had married Carmen's brother and taken the Warren name permanently, finally reclaiming the identity stolen from her in childhood. Carmen visited frequently, having relocated to Seattle to work with Fletcher's Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping victims of long-term fraud and identifying criminal networks before they could claim new victims. The Warren parents had become Fletcher's closest friends, bonded by their shared experience of loss and recovery. June Warren often said that Fletcher had given them back their daughter, but Fletcher knew the truth was more complex. They'd all saved each other. Fletcher himself had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The betrayal had made him harder, more suspicious, less willing to trust. But it had also shown him the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose. He'd never remarried, never again allowed anyone that level of access to his heart. Some wounds, he'd learned, don't heal. They just teach you to live differently. But watching Sarah with her daughter, seeing Carmen find peace in helping other victims, knowing that the Warren family was whole again, these things gave Fletcher a satisfaction deeper than any business success ever had. His phone buzzed with a text from Malcolm. New case. Similar pattern to the old network. Interested, Fletcher looked at his chosen family, then back at the message. Some fights, he learned, never really end. They just moved to new battlefields. He typed back, "Send me everything." Because Fletcher Cummings had learned one crucial truth from his war with Phyllis and her family. Some people exist to hurt others, and the only way to stop them is to be willing to hurt them back. He'd spent 3 years teaching Phyllis and Tomas the price of betrayal. He'd spent 2 more years dismantling their entire network. And he'd spend however many years remain teaching the same lesson to anyone else who thought they could prey on innocent people. Fletcher Cummings never forgave, never forgot, and never stopped hunting the monsters who hid among humanity. It was a hard way to live, but it was the only way he knew how to protect the people he loved. And in the end, that was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.